Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you a good friend of mine, somebody that's been a friend of mine for about 30 years now. Um, Excellent educator and attorney at law, the person who has the Democratic nomination for the 90th Assembly District, which was the district that Shelley Meyer used to hold. Right now, he doesn't have a primary. He's going into the general election. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Nader Sayegh.
I'm sorry, before we proceed,
What happened?
I just wanted to, it was pointed out to me that I misspoke a few minutes ago and did not properly identify Gary Pretlow's position. I want to make clear that he is a state assemblyman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, thank you, and we can continue.
So, Nader, why are you running?
I'm running because I've been involved for 40 years in Yonkers, involved in politics. I consider myself a product to the community. I consider myself someone that understands Yonkers from nearly 40 years of involvement, having grown up on Waverly Street and Buena Vista Avenue, Southwest Yonkers. I'm a product of the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
And in light of the enormous issues before the school district and the children of Yonkers, especially the funding from the state, it really was the proper time and to really follow the footsteps of our state delegation, our state senators and assembly people that have represented us, and to really continue the fight and really bring Yonkers its fair share of funding. So these are issues that really are very important to me. In addition to taxes, in addition to small businesses, job development, healthcare. And I feel that myself and my family have been an integral part of Yonkers, New York for over 60 years now.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
I feel I'm not
They
only
can't hear you.
I feel I'm
Is
not
this
only
mic open?
deserving,
Okay.
but I feel
Thank
I'm
you.
the most qualified candidate, Lorraine.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you and I go back.
Way back.
Way back in the days of working in Southwest Yonkers
Mm-hmm.
with Latino and African American organizations and trying to do whatever we could to give each child an opportunity to grow and prosper.
Now, the big question is that everyone, it seems to ask, any candidate, what are you going to do to secure funding? What can you do differently that anybody else hasn't tried? They still can't hear you.
No, AJ said that's much better. That's
Oh, AJ said that's much better. Hi, AJ.
speak one more time, Nader.
Hi, AJ. Nice to be on this show.
Floyd, do you hear Nader, Floyd?
Hello, testing 1 2. No, we can hear. You can hear me. Okay.
Okay. So what can you what are you going to do to secure funding that anybody else?
Sure. Lorraine, for some 30 years, I know and recall that Yonkers is a community, Board of Ed trustees, administration, especially public officials, have long taken the position that funding is a problem. And what we're told by Albany historically is, Yonkers, you're part of a rich county, and therefore you don't deserve the type of funding the other big cities like Buffalo and New York City and Rochester and Syracuse. And I've already led a serious initiative to really get the state to recognize that the funding formula is wrong, because the funding formula that truly bases what we get per child, it's based on the wealth. And when we look at a school district like Yonkers, when some 80% of our children are on free and reduced lunch, where's the correlation between the wealth? Our kids and their parents don't own that property that's wealthy. What I propose, and I've made a point of elaborating that very clearly,
You basically have to put it close to
what
your
I
mouth.
propose is to have the federal government guidelines that is based on financial background that determines who gets free and reduced lunch. That should be the criteria that's based heavily in the formula. And also the number of special ed children, English language children, and these are populations that I've worked with for 40 years, whether as a school principal, as a classroom teacher, or as a Board of Ed trustee. I've dealt with high need population students, and I recognize the enormous amount of services that are required to have an equal playing field, to make sure that every child has the support they need and deserve. That funding formula, when I research that, Lorraine, it comes down to basic math, $5,000 a year less of state funding per Yonkers kid.
Wow.
This is 27,000 children we have, times $5,000 less of state funding amounts to nearly $45 million a year that we lose. And we lose
That's
that
a lot of
funding.
money.
That's a lot of money. That's why the formula is so unfair. For anybody that tells us don't waste your time, my main initiative among a lot of issues is to go up to Albany, bring the facts to them, and demand, whether it's bringing coalitions together, people from other urban settings, other parts of the state that have common concerns and needs, to realize that the way to address this is to have a statewide change in the formula. What they blame us year after year is, oh, we can't do something special for Yonkers. So we're forced to go to Albany, our PTA, our city administration, our parents and students. We lobby Albany. We go there year after year, and they make us feel like they're giving us a handout each year, which is a shame. They should fix the formula, and we told them up there, whether the budget department or the delegation members that are responsible in their committees, that give us our rightful share, and we'll never beg them for another dime again. We'll live within our means.
Nader, I was wondering if you could do me the favor, if not members of our audience, and just give us a little more background about what the current funding formula is so we can better understand how it leads to these kind of disparities.
The present funding formula, that it took a lot of time, by the way, to demand from the state, tell us what this formula is all about. And most people never understood it. But they base at least 50% of the formula on the wealth of the county you live in, about 25% on the number of students you serve, and about 25% is based on high needs population. So part of the formula, or part of the changes I am proposing, really amounts to making 50% at least of that formula, and base that on the federal guidelines of free and reduced lunch that are more reflective of the wealth of the students and their parents, and then look at it at least at 25% on high needs population. We all know as educators that to educate a special ed child or to educate an English language learner with ESL requires greater teaching time, support services, and other targeted instructional means, including Title I services. And the other 25%,
What are Title I services?
Title I is reading lab, federal government funds through Title I that allows
Okay.
children extra academic instruction in small group instruction, ESL, having a reading lab, a math lab, preparation for the state standardized testing.
Okay.
These are crucial services that our kids need.
Okay.
Okay, so the
Sure.
the formula that's currently used is based on the county's wealth, which
Largely.
is, or a considerable part, I should say. 50% of the funding need is based on the county's wealth, but the city of Yonkers, there are significant disparities in the amount of wealth that the county has as opposed to each of the individual municipalities. And I guess the city of Yonkers has one of the highest concentrations of people who are living in poverty and in economic
Correct.
straits. So you don't feel...
You got that right. That's why it really causes Yonkers an injustice. And what we're looking at also is a potential change of the status of Yonkers and take us out of Westchester County and the index that the state uses to determine wealth of property and so forth. in Westchester and tie us in more to parts of New York City and Queens, for example, that have a different formula. And our recommendation, and what people that understand what we're talking about are realizing, that in order to make it more fair, you got to tie in Yonkers to a similar economic standing. We're more similar to the Bronx. When you look at the population we serve in our public school system, we're more similar to the Bronx and Queens than we are to Tuckahoe and Eastchester and Scarsdale and Bronxville. That's where the injustice is.
Do you think that's even possible? That
I think so. I've already reached out to state delegation members. I've worked very closely with our state delegation that represents us, Senator Cousins and Senator Meyer now, and Assemblyman Gary Pretlow. And they've worked very hard, and they've worked hard to get a tremendous increase in funding over the years. But it's a big challenge because it's year after year we're going up there and lobbying for that funding. The formula is crucial. And for individuals that tell me, well, my kids are in private schools, I'm a homeowner, and I don't use the public schools, why is it important for me? And very simple, whenever Yonkers is shortchanged from the state with funding for our schools, the city has to kick in.
oh, the
The city.
taxpayers.
So therefore, when the taxpayers this past year saw over a 6% tax increases, they were very upset, and rightfully so. So my message is, the more funding we get that we're entitled to from the state, the less the need is to raise taxes. So it really impacts each and every person in our city.
Now, I mean, this would seem to make a lot of sense, and I'm curious, what are some of the major impediments that have prevented the state legislator from adopting reforms of the kind to the budgetary formula that you propose? Why the hold up? Why the opposition?
Because a large part of it, I mean, that's a good question, and it's been politics. Politics involving how upstate politics reacts to downstate politics, urban education to small school districts. This is why, as I stated earlier, that to change that formula, it needs to be a statewide change of formula. In the past, unfortunately, most of the emphasis on changing that was focused on a Yonkers formula or a solution for Yonkers. And the problem is, no matter how hard our present state delegation works, and they do a very efficient job, it's very difficult for them to rally the state assembly and senate members from other parts of the state. This is why the difference would be to lobby similar communities, as we stated earlier. For example, the Buffalo state senators and assemblymen, and the Rochester and the Syracuse, and even here in Westchester, you go to Ossining and you go to Peekskill and other neighborhoods, and New Rochelle and Mount Vernon and other communities that are similar to us. Their representatives that are up in Albany, I would reach out to them, and I would reach out to members of the Bronx delegation and have them on board with us to really build up a coalition. And I consider myself someone that has been a team member. I've always rallied at the school building level as a principal, teachers and parents and students working together. I will do the same thing in Albany. I will utilize my educational background and experience, my community activities. I would utilize my legal background as an attorney to study the law, study the legislation, and truly reach out, that I'm very effective in reaching out to members of the delegations from throughout the state and begin to communicate to them a need to modify the formula. And people that say, well, it's impossible, nearly 2 weeks ago, Governor Murphy in New Jersey did an overhaul of the New Jersey state educational funding formula. And there was a recognition there that too many poor districts were not getting their rightful share of New Jersey state funding. So if New Jersey did it, what's the problem in New York? So for people that tell me, Nader, you're embarking on something that's impossible, nonsense. This is very possible. Very recently, there was a major state in our neighborhood that changed its funding formula throughout the state, and there's no reason why we here in New York can't do the same.
Right. Also, you know, it seems to me that even though when we talk about um, underfunding of public education, very often we have in mind school districts that are largely have large minority enrollments. I know that there are many other upstate districts in New York that have large concentrations of poverty and are encountering very serious economic hardships of their own. And it would seem to me like those districts would represent natural allies that recognize that there is a need to rework the funding formula so that their kids, and here I'm talking about, these are probably kids, a good number of them who are white kids, are also in some of these upstate districts, are also receiving a subpar education.
And you're so right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The issue impacts students of similar needs and concerns. And as you said, it's throughout the state. And this is why it's doable, it's crucial for Yonkers, it impacts our children. When we try to avoid layoffs year after year, and we work with our labor groups, and we try to make sure people can hold on to their careers and their jobs, and then we're given the threat of not only layoffs, but the potential loss of serious services we provide our children. Often, the first on the chopping block is subjects like music and art and recreational programs and support services, because they're not mandated. We're mandated as educators to make sure there's classroom teachers teaching our children. So whenever school districts, not only Yonkers, are forced to make cuts, they go after those unmandated services, but they're crucial services. So when our kids lose the opportunity to have ample music and art and library and physical education and sports program, that's a major tragedy for our kids. We've been able to restore a lot of these services. I've been a trustee now in my 6th year on the Board of Ed, totally a volunteer position. I spend nearly 20 hours a week of my time, and especially when I served 3 years as president of the Board
I
of
was just going to
Trustees.
say, you've been the chairman of
I was
the
the
board,
president of
the
the board
president of the board.
For 3 years, and during that time,
Wow, while practicing law.
while practicing law, while raising a
That's
family,
pretty impressive.
and serving, of course, on my numerous other organizations that I've been involved with for many years.
Uh-huh.
But the interesting point is, when I came on the Board of Trustees, as a simple fact, the graduation rate in Yonkers was about 70%, the high school graduation rate. This past school year, Yonkers had one of the highest graduation rates in the entire state, with 86%.
Wow.
86%. I mean, that is unseen.
Unheard of.
Not only in New York State, but on the national level. And what do we attribute to that to? We attribute that to a major focus on transparency. When I was president of the Board of Education, we demanded that the Board of Ed have committees for every function, for instructional affairs, for facilities, for policy, for community services, and encourage parents and educators to come and serve on these committees so that everybody has a voice. And when we look back and see what was done to develop transparency and consolidation of services, the intermunicipal agreement, they call it the IMA, was during my tenure on the board, after the unfortunate situation of some $55 million mistake that was made by the finance people at the school district, at the city of Yonkers, at the state level. This was a problem where there was no misappropriation of funds. The problem was individuals relied on a pattern where the state lends money to communities and they have to pay it back.
Uh-huh.
And they relied on 2 years of such loans when the loans were never really given or approved.
Oh, Jesus.
So it was during my tenure as board president that we tracked that down. We did financial accounting. We held people accountable and responsible, and we fixed the problem, where now there's one finance system that the school district, city of Yonkers, working with the state. This way we know exactly what expenses, what revenue, what resources we have. That was a problem that was fixed. that was fixed during my tenure as board president. And today, we have a system in place where year after year, we're saving as much money as possible, providing as much services as possible, and getting positive results. As I said earlier, 86% graduation rate, something that I'm proud of, and I'm sure it's something to continue to build on.
Okay. I want to ask you a follow-up question, Nader, specifically about the need for a change in the funding formula. But before I do, I want to welcome County Legislator Lyndon Williams, who recently tuned in. He's a regular listener, and we always appreciate him joining us to have discussions about important political public affairs. Now, you said that you thought it was in the interest of the city of Yonkers and other municipalities that are under financial duress to seek an alternative funding formula. And because you said what it means is that it largely places the burden for financing the education system on local municipal homeowners. And it reminded me of the recent enactment of reforms at the federal level with regard to state and local tax, property taxes, so-called SALT taxes. And I'm curious to know if, my understanding is that some of these statutes were under challenge. I don't know their status right now. But should the state and local tax reductions that President Trump proposed be fully enacted, what is the impact going to be on New York taxpayers, and what will the ramifications be for funding of our public education system?
I think the ramifications are enormous. You got to realize Yonkers property owners that pay a large percentage of taxes, and they pay more for public education than other communities because of the lack of state funding. They rely on a tax system that's been imposed by the Trump administration that limits the amount of deductions for each homeowner to $10,000 a year. Now, a lot of taxpayers are paying anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 to $25,000 a year, especially that property owners that own a single family. And these individuals can no longer deduct their full mortgages and taxes. So they're limited to $10,000 that the Trump administration realizes, well, we feel that's a proper number. Maybe that's a proper number in Carolina and in the Midwest and other parts of the country. But in the Northeast, especially New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, where the property values are much higher, it really causes a serious problem. This is why New York State government is looking at initiatives to try to bypass or compromise what the Trump administration is doing. And we see this happening with many issues. For example, advocates of pro-choice or advocates of, especially with the recent Supreme Court nomination of
Brett
Kavanaugh. Mm-hmm. There's a major concern now that New York State and the governor signed into legislation, whereas New York will go and protect the rights of individuals to abortions, for example, and to continue to have the pro-choice approaches that they want. Whereas with taxes, it's the same situation. The problem we have is that whenever the federal government initiates policies that are biased or unfair for states, especially New York State, it forces us, and as an assemblyman, I would work to make sure that any initiatives that protect us from the White House or Trump administration policies, that we undertake to protect us in whatever way we need to. So you're right, it's a serious problem, taxes. It forces more of a concern. Many individuals can't afford their homes. Many residents begin to move out of the community, and it becomes a problem where it impacts our children, impacts our tax base, and our ability to provide services for our students.
How do you feel about charter schools?
I'm against the concept of taking money that is designated to the public school system and to give it to any school. Now it happens that chartered schools were established in districts that had poor results. And if you look at Buffalo and Syracuse and Rochester, they have so many more chartered schools than we do. We have in Yonkers one chartered school, and that's a credit to public education in Yonkers. Usually, the formation of new chartered school there's a correlation with poor results in public schools where parents want to send their kids to charter. I've made a point of saying chartered schools should reach out and get a whole separate funding source, preferably private funding, then that's fine. But to pit Yonkers residents against each other, public and chartered school, because any funds you put to chartered school take away from public, that's a serious problem. And when that happens, we in public education have to cancel sports programs and art and music, which again is very crucial. I am a public school advocate. I've been an educator in the Yonkers schools nearly 45 years with the Board of Ed now. My 5 daughters are all products of the public school. We're 8 brothers and sisters, and all of us are products of the public schools. Thank God we've done very well professionally, our careers, and that's largely to public education. So when I, as an attorney, as an educator, believe in due process and give each person an opportunity to be heard, that's a right every individual has. And if somebody mistakes my respect for due process and questions my support for public education, then they got it all very wrong. Again, I'm an advocate of public education. Anything that takes away a dime from public schools, I'm against.
Can I have a follow-up?
Yeah, yeah.
So, Nate, I'm myself am very skeptical of charter schools for a number of reasons, including their historical origin in opposition to desegregation of the U.S. public school system during the 1950s. I think it's very important that anyone who is considering the efficacy of charter school proposals be aware of the fact that it was largely advocated by segregationists who did not want to see children of color attending school alongside white kids. Now, having said that, so I think there are principal reasons to be opposed to charter schools. However, I do think that one criticism that advocates of charter schools are spot on with is the criticism that the public school system tends to insulate public schools against competitive pressures that would cause them to use funds more efficiently, deliver a quality education to our kids. And I think the only reason that we're having this conversation about charter school policy is largely because of the very spotty record of our public school systems. And I have to say, I am a public school educator. I teach at a college, a public college. So I am a big proponent.
Your colleagues.
Yes, we, in some respect, we are. That's another conversation.
Well, I taught college too, so we have a lot in common.
Right.
And you're right. People that question chartered school definitely question the makeup, the enrollment policy, the registration policy of chartered schools. And as public educators, we want to make sure that there's an equal playing field. So if I have a public school and I'm required to treat and enroll every child in an equitable fashion that walks through my doors, I would expect the chartered schools to do likewise, whether it's to make sure that there's an equitable racial breakdown of the population or ethnicities, or even economic status, or even learning disabilities, for example, or English language learners. When we don't see that, and chartered schools or private schools focus on an enrollment policy that accepts only students that they feel would succeed, then that's an injustice. We as public educators educate every child that walks through our doors. So it becomes a little bit unfair when they compare data to say, well, my data is higher. Well, maybe you're not treating the same population and the same concerns and issues that we in public education do. So that's why it's a point well taken that there's many issues that show concern as to whether or not there's equity in chartered school. And of course, the funding issue is crucial. You know, our funding should be geared 100% to public education. With all the criticism that it has, it's the one best system. In my opinion, as a historian, as an educator, the one best system that has brought generations of immigrants and everybody else to give them an opportunity to succeed has been public education. So that's my advocacy, that's my support base, and this is my main initiative going to Albany, among many other issues, public funding, public education.
Let me just say we got a couple of other people tuned in. AJ it's tuned in.
Good evening, AJ.
Good evening, AJ. Dawn Seawright tuned in. Donna Jackson, Brian Harrod. Hey, Brian. Brian Harrod joined in. And Karen, my sister, Karen Edmondson. Karen DaCosta Edmondson just joined us, too. Now, Luis Cherico keeps saying that, let me just read what she says, because she said again, because she said it prior. She said, Yonkers homeowners send their kids to Catholic schools. They will always fight you until Spano improves the schools first. They don't care about the waterfront. Nobody does. They want the schools funded by the city first. I'm going to be, as a native, born and raised Yonkers gal, I'm going to have to disagree with that. Because, number one, Spano's working hard to improve the school system. Number two, we've got a couple of Catholic schools that have closed down because the folks cannot afford to send their kids to Catholic schools, and they're sending them to public schools. And yes, we do care about the waterfront, because when I was in the city council, I was one of the first city council members to vote on the waterfront, and it's a wonderful, wonderful new addition to the city of Yonkers. And anybody have any questions? Lyndon Williams said the Trump SALT policy that disallowed deductions for blue states like New York and California is the most partisan, backward-thinking policy of any president. Both Democrats and Republicans, New York and California, pay more taxes and bring more revenues to the federal budget than any other state. That was from County Legislator Lyndon Williams.
By the way, just Lorraine, you know, I have the pleasure of having attended Pace Law School with County Legislator Lyndon Williams.
Oh,
so,
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so a commonality there, and you know, welcome to the show, and always a pleasure to hear from you.
I also wanted to echo a comment of one of our viewers, Donna Jackson, who shared a link to a letter that was recently issued by the
Chancellor?
Yes, by the Chancellor's office, the Board of Regents, I believe. Hopefully I'm getting that part right. But the gist of the letter is that to express opposition to a recent proposal, I don't know if it's yet been passed, but I heard about it, that would allow the New York State Board of Regents to reduce the certification requirements for charter school teachers. And this would be part of a much broader pattern that you were alluding to, whereby the charter schools have an advantage over public schools that allow them to operate more efficiently and therefore give the appearance that they are providing a better quality of education. And this would be an example. As a college professor, I can tell you that, and someone who has a PhD, I had contemplated teaching in the public school system at a lower level, primary, secondary level, because actually it pays better than to teach at the college level, strangely enough.
You're right.
And funny enough,
He's right.
I found it very difficult to meet the qualifications, because even though I had a PhD, there was certain coursework that I had to attend, I had to complete, that I had in basically how to teach. And in addition, I had to pass certification in certain subject areas that are not a requirement of one's doctoral degree, just very different systems in that regard. But the idea that somehow or the other charter schools would be allowed to lower the bar in terms of the qualifications for newly admitted teachers, while the public schools will be required to maintain a very high bar, I think does both a disservice to charter school students and also to the taxpayers themselves, because again it gives a very distorted picture of the outcome of these two different approaches to education.
You're right. See, we spoke about earlier about making sure there's proper playing field when you compare public education to chartered school, and that's another example. When the state allows chartered schools to lessen the requirement for higher and efficient staff members, that really causes a problem, you know, with the delivery of effective learning and teaching. And that's one of the main concerns. And plus, when chartered schools get a certain amount of money that from public education, and they don't have the similar expenses that we have, then that's another problem. Because if they're paying their teachers less, and we're paying more for our public schools teachers because they have their license, they have their credentials and qualifications, that is also wrong. So I think the concept that's being passed to the Board of Regents and to the Governor's office and to the state delegation is, you know, to stop taking public school funding to compensate chartered schools. If chartered schools are allowed to operate, and we have many private schools, whether they're religious schools or chartered schools, let them operate, let them get their funding through tuition or through private donations, but don't impact and take away public education funds. Don't put yourself on the same playing field and claim that you're compatible to what public schools do when you can't do it. That's the main concern. So you're right on that point, and it's something that I know the state legislators have been echoing this message in Albany for years now, and now it's become even more important with the Commissioner of Education on the federal level that is a big advocate of chartered schools. And this really is an attack on public education, and this time more than ever, I think individuals at all levels need to stand up and protect the integrity of public education. As we said, it's the one best system.
And I want to stress to the audience, listeners, that it's not merely an attack on the delivery of an education that's going to allow future generations to enter into the middle class, but it's also very important for everyone to remember that the public education system is part of a larger system of civil service employment that really has been a ladder for the entrance of African Americans, Latinos, and people of color and other groups that have been largely marginalized from the American economy to enter into the middle class. The attack on big government as such, really in some respects, everyone, is a disguised attack on the very economic institutions that have given once excluded groups a loose toehold on middle class existence. Should we privatize? Should we go over to a model of education that largely seeks to privatize education? What that means is that more and more people who once taught in public schools that enjoyed lifetime tenure when they met the qualification, that enjoyed a robust system of due process, those things would be eliminated. And in this sense, the call for charter schools is very much in keeping with the effort to deunionize workplaces across the United States. And people need to be aware. So it's going to hit possibly not only future generations who may find that their resources have been drained away by charter schools, but it may hit current adult middle class professionals who went off to college in the hopes of becoming public school teachers and to enjoy a decent standard of living that comes with it, and may find themselves forced to teach in charter schools where there are no union protections. And my sense is that, you know, forget all of the rosy, you know, stories about charter schools. My sense is that a lot of the teaching staff and in charter schools is very deeply demoralized because of the very autocratic approach that's used there.
Well, you're right. Even we spoke earlier about the impact of federal government and the Trump administration. The other area you pointed out is labor and unions, and the Janus decision that recently was brought down. The politics behind that was to really begin to take shots to crush unionism in America.
Right.
And I think any individual that realizes the balance, the economic balance, and the need for America to promote more good paying jobs, and through unions, individuals that have good paying jobs that can depend on those jobs and remain in those jobs and have careers in those jobs their entire life till retirement, really puts them in a position where they can raise their families. And I, for one, would focus and believe and advocate for greater job growth than allowing and forcing people to go on government support. So when more people lose their jobs and they have to rely on government support, then the tax base goes up and the formula goes out of whack. So when we as educators put more programs in job development and the government initiates more job development, and yes, unionism, even though some people may have issues with unionism, it's one effective way that really allows for tenure, protects people in their jobs and careers, especially from intimidation and politics that took place many years ago, and allows an individual to buy a home and raise a family and rely on his or her career. That's important, and we're losing track of that. This is why the Janus decision is a terrible decision, and a lot of what's coming down from Washington is really very unprogressive. It's wrong, and it really is geared to destroying those institutions and those established presence that protect the working people and the working class. So that's another key initiative with the Janus decision. And again, I wanted just to say hello to Lyndon Williams, fellow classmate at Pace Law School, and him and I have a picture together with the many graduates from Pace in the court system and in government and politics, and we're glad to see that the Pace alumni base is growing. Lyndon, keep it up.
He said, Nader, great to see you, my friend.
Pleasure's mine.
Absolutely. I want to give a shout out to Tasha.
Tasha, honey D.
Tasha just checked in, one of our stalwart comrades. Good to see you, Tasha.
So Nate, well, our next guest has already arrived, but let me ask you a question. If you were speaking to the voters, well, you are speaking to the voters, can you tell them why you think they should vote for you?
Sure. No, thank you very much, first of all, to Black Westchester, and it's an initiative that's extremely important, and it's a voice that allows individuals to really voice out their concerns and to be on the show. And I know, Lorraine, you've spoken about the many individuals and all aspects of government and services that appear on the show. That's really reflective and respect of the work your team does. And it's reflective of the need to express the message. And my message before the voters is that Nader Sayegh is the candidate for New York State Assembly. I have the endorsement of the Democrat Party,
Yes.
the Independence Party.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Cavallo gave you the
He gave
endorsement?
me the endorsement.
Okay.
I have the Reform Party, and I have the Women's Equality Party.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Tasha would be happy to hear
Yeah,
that.
so Women's Equality endorsed my candidacy. You know, we're working very hard. I believe that through the election of someone like myself, the voters can expect a person that knows the entire city of Yonkers, that knows the issues. I've been in Yonkers 60 plus years. I've been very entrenched in community services, primarily as a volunteer.
Your entire family has been.
My entire family in education and law and health care, the many voters out there that are seeing or have medical doctors that are from my family,
Yes.
or teachers or educators that taught them, or lawyers that represented them on various matters. It's a family commitment that we've made to Yonkers. And
Yes,
it's a
yes.
volunteer record of 40
You're a
years.
prominent family in the city of Yonkers,
And
yes.
Lorraine, I've never earned a single dime in 40 years of service. It's because I care about the city. I have the educational background. I have the skills. I have the know-how to build teams and build coalitions. And I would be the individual that would go to Albany, work with our state delegation, and start working hard for our city and our students. I have those techniques, I have those skills, and I ask for the voters to not put their trust in individuals that just tell them what they think and what they feel, but individuals that have had the experience, the hands-on experience, and the ability to say, look, I've been there, I've done it, and I'll continue to do it with an aggressive approach. Not to sit back and have a learning experience for a year. The seat is already vacant because Shelley Mayer, our dear friend, is elected state senator. So we need to make sure that the individual that goes to Albany tackles the issue as soon as possible. It's not a long process. It would hurt us to have somebody go on job training up there to learn who to deal with and what to deal with. I've been to Albany. I've lobbied Albany for years on behalf of public education. I know the players. I know the departments. I would go to Albany and immediately start representing the best interest of Yonkers.
With that being said, are you willing to come back when AJ and Damon are here? Are you willing to come back to People Before Politics and sit down and have a conversation with your opinion?
It's my pleasure. You know, I've always welcomed effective communications and the opportunity to say what's on our minds, our views and opinions, and to give the voter an opportunity to hear it.
Now, Nader, how can people reach you if they want to contribute to your
Campaign, volunteer.
Yeah, or reach you on social media?
Yeah,
Or-
I'll tell you, there's on Facebook, Sayegh for Assembly. On Twitter, it's Twitter at Sayegh 2018, and on and then also Instagram at Nader Sayegh for Assembly.
Okay.
So these are three sources, and you know, I have my law practice at 10 Palisade Avenue. Presently, my headquarters is there. It's in the heart of downtown Yonkers, and anyone that's interested can visit me at the law office, or
Do you have a campaign headquarters? Or
I
that's
have a campaign headquarters
Where's
at
that
10
located?
Palisade Avenue.
10 Palisade. There you go.
Yeah. So again, these are locations: Facebook, Sayegh for Assembly; Twitter at Sayegh 2018; and Instagram at Nader Sayegh for Assembly. So we welcome each and every person's input, and you know, we have good, effective listening skills, and we understand people have different opinions. And my job was to listen to what the concerns are and use our experience to get people together, because at the end of the day, you got to do what's good for Yonkers. You know, the days of partisan politics, you know, is good when you're running for election and primaries, but then at the end of the day, you got to do what's right for your residents, because when I'm elected assemblyman, my goal is to represent every citizen in my assembly district.
Okay. Luis Cherico said, thank you for coming on and giving me a chance to get to know where you stand. Best wishes. I'll talk to my friends in Yonkers.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And for anyone who is tuned in on Facebook, I did take the moment to post the actual
There it is. I see it.
credentials, for your various sites. That reminds me of how much we miss one of our indispensable behind-the-scenes staff persons at this moment, Brenda.
Brenda.
Yes, wherever you at, Brenda, we miss you.
I think she's on vacation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I'm gonna. Yay! Well, thank you so much for coming. It's good to see you, Nader. Thank you for coming. I wish you all the best.
And I apologize because I missed the previous engagement. There was a very important family event.
No worries.
But I'm glad I made it today, and I just want you to know I'm very concerned and very passionate about my community and very passionate about your efforts and the efforts of all of us that work together to really achieve success for all children and families. Thank you so much.
Dr. Bob, you had another question?
Yes, I
Okay.
do have a departing question, and it is a serious question and may take a moment for you to consider. Since I've become more actively involved in electoral politics, in particular, one of the pet peeves that I have had, and it's partly due to my scholarly studies, is the lack of competition within the Democratic Party itself. And the reason that I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, because it seems to me that one of the motivations for the complaints that are behind a lot of America's institutions, whether it be our educational system or our unions, is that there has been in the internal elite that has managed to consolidate and entrench its powers and is growing less and less responsive to the needs of everyday people that they represent. This is also true of the two-party system in the United States as a whole, which has been insulated from serious competition through a variety of means. But it also seems to be true of the Democratic Party in major cities, in cities where you have large populations of color, where Republicans can't compete at all because they have such backward policies.
True.
But the reason that I mention this is because in getting an update, I signed off for your petition, and one of the things I said to you is I'm giving you support. We hadn't met, so.
Sure.
But one of the things I said is that I want to see healthy competition in this primary season for the open seat that you're running for.
Mm-hmm.
And as Lorraine and I were sort of, going over our brief before the show, one of the things that she brought to my attention was that some of your competitors had been eliminated from the primary as a result of legal challenges. One of whom was here a couple of weeks ago, and I know I watched from home. I thought he did a fabulous job. He sounded also like a promising candidate. I know, of course, any court decisions that redound to you that you benefit from in some respects are welcome because you want to win office.
Mhm.
But I would imagine that many of our viewers feel a lot more ambivalent, that in some respects they do not want to see the elimination of inter-party competition. They want to see an increase so that we can be sure that we have good, effective candidates. And I want to ask you,
Sure.
Reforms that you propose to make for up in Albany for our state funding are, much needed.
Correct.
But another reform that we need, and this is a reform that has to be spearheaded by our local Democratic Party leaders, is reforms to the party system so that we can have genuine, healthy competition to ensure that we're reviewing the full range of policies. And I want to know, have you and other members of the local Democratic Party leadership given any thought to reforms that can be made so that those of us who really want to get out here and do the hard work, grassroots work, can feel good at the end of the day that it was a fair, open primary and that we've gotten the best possible candidate that we can?
No, it's a good question, and I'm an advocate of the Democrat process,
Right.
and the Board of Elections and state and local election laws are very clear. And when we look at reforms, and we should look at methods and ways to encourage greater voter participation and to make early voting and other requirements that make it easier to vote. I think, that's a crucial area, and any attempts to try to discourage people from voting, we should work against, and I will work against it. The establishment of guidelines, for example, in my assembly race, the Board of Elections requires 500 valid Democrat signatures to sign someone's petition to allow that person to go before the voters and say, hey, I have the support of my party, I'm eligible to enter primary. That process assures that there isn't so many individuals that are not deserving.
Right.
For example, I would encourage many of our potential candidates, and this is a lesson to be learned, that if you're interested in seeking public office, I would encourage you to serve whatever political party you'd like to be involved. But in my case, as a Democrat, I would encourage these individuals join the establishment. There's many opportunities to serve as a district leader. Go out, work for candidates, carry petitions. For example, Yonkers, in this assembly district, there was nearly 36,000 Democrat voters. 36,000. So when you tell someone, if you're deserving and you're involved and you're active, go out and get 500 valid Democrats.
And they couldn't do it?
And they couldn't do it.
That,
you know what
if
the
you
concern
can't get
is?
500 signatures out of 30,000,
Now,
that's
when I
embarrassing.
went- When I went to your home and got your signature, I had a list of all.
And you were there on a Sunday, I
Yeah,
think.
and I went to Runyon Heights, and I had a list of all registered Democrats. So I know they're registered, up-to-date Democrats, and I went door to door and made sure registered Democrats. When individuals go out that don't know the process, don't know how it works efficiently, and they go to train stations, or they go to ShopRite or some local store, and anybody that walks by them, please sign my petition, and you find that nearly a third to half of those are not registered Democrat, then that does an injustice to the Democrat Party. If you're a Democrat voter and someone is getting signatures that amounts to half of them that are either not registered or registered with other political parties or not even registered in your district, you would get upset. And my concern is there's a process in place, learn the process, be involved, serve as a district leader, work with candidates, so when you go before the Democratic Party or other parties you seek their endorsement, you tell them this is why I deserve your support. And when you have an established support base like I did, the Democrat Party establishment, that was something I welcomed. I worked with the many wonderful ward leaders and district leaders. I had early on, the first thing I did was for district leaders a meet and greet at my house where I met the district leaders, I gave them information, we spoke about their issues, their concerns, mine, and we interlinked together. And that's what I built my campaign on. So I put out a message to all my opponents that our main target at this point is the November election, to take that seat away from the Republicans, because we got to be unified. We got to make sure that the primary process took place, the petition process took place. Now it's a time that we got to focus, we got to join together, we have common interests, common concerns, and we need to focus on November 6th. That's when the general election. We want that seat to stay a Democrat seat. We don't want that seat to turn a Republican seat. And if we have disenchanted movements and efforts that really split us up, then that's the worst thing that can happen. So I welcome my opponents, come on board, join the committee, let's work together, and who knows, these same opponents can bring a lot to the table, but I would encourage them to get involved with government, with process, with the community, and who knows what their opportunities would be moving forward.
Right. I believe that the Democratic Party is going to be a lot stronger when reforms are made that doesn't lead to widespread feelings of discontent. However, I agree, we got an election to worry about in November, and so I will take the appropriate action myself.
Well, I got to bring in the next guest.
Yes.
You're welcome to stay if you want, Nader.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it again, and looking forward to another appearance, hopefully.
Okay. Oh, all
Yeah, so,
right. You
yes.
heard it here first.
Yeah. And I love, that's a very, very good newsletter, by the way. If anybody hasn't seen it, Black Westchester, People Before Politics. So it's a great source of information and news, and make sure you get your hands on it. Thank you.
Well, we certainly appreciate you coming by the studio, joining us to make sure that our audience is informed about your candidacy, and we wish you well. Yes. in
Thank
your
you
bid.
very much.
And, you know, as it turns out, I will be casting my vote for you for a Democrat. Yes.
Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.